choosing to get informed for this on the ballot. I've been told it's one of the most important votes that you can take in the last decade, and it may be the most important thing in the Illinois election for November 3rd. So thanks so much for coming out, and we hope we get all of your questions answered by the end of the evening. I am, as said, with the League of Women Voters of Illinois. We do have a position in favor of the fair tax, but I will try to present you with all of the information, and we'll answer any questions that you might have, pro or con or in between. So this is what you need to know, we think. So first of all, what will be on the ballot? The General Assembly passed Senate Joint Resolution Constitutional Amendment 1 to put this on the ballot a year ago, asking whether to approve the flat rate income tax requirement, to remove it in the Constitution. And so that is what is on your ballot. That's if you've gotten your mail-in ballot, it's kind of in the middle. I haven't seen where it is on your ballot when you walk into the ballot booth, but it will be the first question, or it may be on a separate piece of paper, but it will be one of the first things that you encounter. If you don't see it, keep looking for it. I've heard of people who've had trouble finding it. It's kind of buried in there. So this is what is being changed in the Constitution. This is what is being stricken from this article. They are taking out the language that income shall be at a non-graduated rate, and just adding that the General Assembly shall provide by law for the rates of any tax on income proposed by the state. So this involves state income tax, and the General Assembly is who sets your rates today, and that will continue if this passes. All it does is strike out the language that it has to be at a non-graduated rate. This is what is actually on the ballot. It doesn't have the exact language from the Constitution. It says that it will remove the portion of the revenue article that is sometimes referred to as the flat rate that requires taxes on income to be at the same rate. And then you check yes or no. And then below that, it will be in Spanish. So look for the yes and no boxes at the beginning of your ballot. So what is this all about? Why isn't a flat tax fair? We're taxing the same rate on everybody's income. The reason is related to the total picture of state and local taxes in Illinois. You've got property taxes, sales taxes, taxes on gasoline and liquor, and all of those kinds of taxes are basically regressive. They hit low-income people harder than people with more money, because everybody is paying exactly the same amount. An income tax, you're paying a percentage of your income, but it still is hitting lower income people harder when you look at the total picture of taxes. A group called the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy has done an analysis of all of the state and local taxes that people pay by the quintiles. So they found that the lowest 20% of taxpayers pay 14.4% of their income in those state and local taxes. Middle income earners pay less than that a little bit, and then the more you make, the less you pay until you get to the top 1%. They're paying half as much as the lowest 20%. They're paying 7.4% of their income in taxes. That is not the case in most of the states in the United States. We are the 8th most regressive state in the country. Ideally, you would at least have the top quintile pay as much as everybody else. And in a progressive rate system, you would have the top pay more, and the lower income folks pay less. But this is the situation in Illinois today. If the fair tax passes, the top 1% will come up slightly. It won't be up to 14.4%. It'll be somewhere in this region. So that is what is on the ballot, is basically Do we want to look at how we are assessing our taxes? Because the income tax is the only tool we have to change this chart. We can't affect this chart with the sales tax or the excise taxes or the property tax. Those are fundamentally regressive. And so if we're going to even this out, we have to look to the income tax to do that. And the reason this is particularly important right now is because there is a growing disparity between the high-end earners and everybody else in our country. Over the last 40 years, the top 1% average income has grown from $411,000 up to $1.4 million, whereas the bottom 99% has stayed relatively flat, going from maybe $51,000 to $61,000 per year. The graduated rate income tax would be a tool to be able to access some of this growth in a way that would level out the tax burden among the population. Part of the reason that the flat tax hasn't worked very well in Illinois is that we have not been raising adequate revenue to fully fund our share of education. Most states pay about 50% of the share of education from the state. The state pays 50% and local government or school districts pay the other 50%. In Illinois, the legislature is supposed to be paying that much, but they haven't been for a long time. And right now, they are paying about 27% of the share of education spending. And so who picks up the difference? The local property owners are forced to make up the difference. And so the current local share of education funding statewide is 66%, rather than, as you can see, the national is 44.8%. The federal government picks up about 8 or 9%, so that's why there's a difference. But this has resulted in some very unfortunate things in our state. We have the worst education inequity in the country between wealthy districts and poor districts. And the result of that is that you have, I think it was 70% of school districts in the state don't have enough funding to provide an adequate education. And many districts, though, some districts have ample funds. They are able to tax their local property owners quite a bit, and they end up with very nice facilities, school nurses, social workers, extra teaching aides, quality special education services. But then districts that are located in areas where there is not ample property to tax have not been able to make up the difference, and those schools have been suffering, and the kids are not getting an adequate education. The legislature recognized that this is a problem. They've known this for a long time. In 2017, they passed what is actually considered one of the best school funding formulas in the country, if it were adequately funded. They looked at what the evidence is for what students need to succeed and do well in school. And they found that there are things that are particularly useful with low-income students who are learning English as a second language, and special ed students. And if more money is provided for those students, they can all do better and do well. So based on this evidence-based funding model, the legislature pledged to add $750 million. Excuse me, that's not right. $350 million. I wish it were $750. $350 million to the state share of education funding every year, year over year, until they can get to adequate funding by 2027. And the state actually stuck to that plan for 3 years. It's not looking very promising for next year, in part because of the COVID problem, but the fair tax would go a long way toward making that possible in future years. Another place where the state is falling down is with environmental protection. This is the actual head count for the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. From 2003 to 2018, their staff has been cut in half, and they have not been able to provide oversight for enforcement of polluting entities, air, soil, and water. Similarly, we have not been able to keep up with our state net parks and our natural resources. So that's another area. The Sierra Club has provided this slide. They are in favor of fair tax to provide more funding to start to pay more attention to the environment. This is a chart from the Center on Tax and Budget Accountability showing what has happened with our funding and our spending on current services. Of the discretionary part of the budget every year, about 96% is spent on 4 core areas: education, healthcare, human services, and public safety. This shows what has happened since the year 2000, adjusted for inflation and population, compared to what the enacted budget was for this year. You can see that education went up slightly compared to 20 years ago, in part because of that evidence-based funding pledge that they kept for 3 years. Higher education, on the other hand, has been drastically cut, and the result of that has been increased tuition, lower scholarships, fewer scholarships available for students, and overall loss of some departments in various universities. This has been a severe and ongoing problem. Healthcare was cut, human services were cut, public safety has been cut, so that the net cut is 20% compared to what we were spending 20 years ago under Republican administration. So when people who say that we should just not raise anybody's taxes, we don't need any more money, haven't really studied this chart. If we want services to be available that we all need and depend on, we need to pay for them. So we invite you at this moment to just think for a moment about how state budgets affect you and your community. A lot of folks don't think much about where that money goes that we send down to Springfield. And a lot, as you see, comes back to our local schools, public health, preschools, road construction, mental health facilities, and so on. Just take a moment to think about whether all of those services have been available for you and your loved ones, whether you know of anybody maybe who lives downstate who hasn't been able to access, say, mental health care or senior services, and what might be cut, especially with the COVID revenue crunch that has hit our state like a ton of bricks. This is where the cuts would have to come from, because this is the discretionary part of the budget. We can't cut back the things we owe to our bondholders. We have contracts out that need to be met. And so these are the services where there is any flexibility in the budget, and that this is what would be bearing the brunt of the cuts. So we are talking about changing the way that we structure our income tax. And as it turns out, most states have this kind of a graduated rate system. 32 states have a graduated rate system. Most of our neighboring states have this. We are one of only 4 states that requires a flat tax in the state constitution. I think there are about 9 states that have chosen to have a flat tax. Well, 5 have chosen and 4 are required. If we pass this amendment to the Constitution, we could still have a flat tax. We could decide in the future we want to go back to a flat tax. What this vote does is it changes the requirement that it has to be a flat tax. And many people think that having a graduated tax system is, for just pure policy reasons, a better way to go to raise adequate revenue and to do it fairly, so that you can adjust against those regressive taxes and make us a fairer system for everyone. So at the same time, the legislature put that on the ballot to change the amendment, to change the Constitution. They also passed a bill saying, well, the voters are going to want to know what we're going to do. How are we going to structure our new system? So they passed another bill that set what the rates will be if the constitutional amendment passes. So this is what would come into effect on January 1st of 2021 if the amendment passes. The legislature has already set it. And with the rates that they set, it means that lower income earners will pay a lower tax rate than they do today. Higher income earners will pay a higher tax rate. And 97% of people will see no income tax increase. And most people will receive a small tax cut. And where's that 97% line? It's at $250,000. So if you make less than $250,000 a year, you will receive a small tax cut. You will not pay more. If you make more than $250,000 a year, if you make a little bit more, you will pay a smaller amount of tax increase. If you make a whole lot more, if you make like Ken Griffin and you make in the hundreds of millions a year, then you will pay a lot more. This is what the structure looks like. The red line is where our taxes are now at 4.95%. And so moving to a graduated rate structure, it's based on the margins, like your federal taxes. So if you make, this is adjusted gross income between 0 and 10,000, which about 27% of taxpayers do, you will pay less. You'll pay 4.75% on that amount. If you make up to 100,000, then that first 10,000 will be at 4.75 and the rest will be at 4.9. So you're still paying less than you do today. If you're up to 250,000, then this 150,000 will be at the current rate, and then, but your total bill will be somewhat less than it is today. Once you get above 250,000, the marginal amount will be taxed at 7.75%, up to 350 or up to 500,000 if you're married filing jointly. And then it goes on up, and when you get to the top bracket, at 750,000 or $1 million for joint filers, and that's only 0.3% of the population, they will pay that 7.99% on their entire income. So the bulk of the revenue raised will come from this group of folks, this 0.3% paying, earning above $1 million will be providing the bulk of the tax increase. Most people, 97%, will pay less. And there's a couple of, yes.
And can we go back to that chart? And
Sure.
Can you just expound a little bit on how marginal rates work?
Okay, sure. So say I make $255,000. I'm very, very happy to make that much. The first $10,000 will be taxed at 4.75%. The next up to 100, the next 90,000 will be taxed at 4.9%. So you just add it up. So you take 4.75 times 10 equals, I've seen this, some states' tax tables kind of spell it out for you. I think your federal does too. So you just multiply that. So you'll end up with a tax bill of $4,000 something. And then the next 90,000, you go 4.90 times 90,000 and you get a number. And then the next 150, I multiply times 4.95. And then I add those up. And then that last extra $50,000 that I make, did I say I made 300? Let's say I make 300. That $50,000 will be taxed at 7.75. So I go 7.75 times 50 and I get a number. I add those four numbers up and that's my tax bill.
So your income gets, you would have 4 different tax rates on an income up to $350,000.
That's right. And a little bit more up to 750. And then once you get to 750 or $1 million, then it's a simpler calculation, but a higher number. You end up with 7.99 times whatever your salary is. That's a kind of like the flat rate. It's a multiplied times the entire sum. I hope that's clearer. It's kind of a tough concept. We've been doing it for years with the federal taxes, and nobody really pays attention too much to it. You don't need to. It's in the tables.
I just think it's important for people to understand that if you make $350,000, we're using that as an example, that whole $350,000 is not taxed at that 7.75.
Right.
It's a graduated tax rate. So thanks, Ann.
Only that amount. And this same tax table applies to businesses as well, for small businesses, which are subchapter S corporations, sole proprietorships, partnerships. Those businesses are taxed as pass-through entities. So the income, the profits from those businesses are passed through into the owner's individual tax return. So if you own a business and your profit is, say, $150,000, that's, you know, net of all of your expenses, that's your pure profit after the Q-tip and all of those other nice federal deductions that you got with the Trump tax reform. You end up paying a lower rate than you do today. Your taxes will be lower if you're a small business owner. If there's two owners of a business that has profit of $250,000, you will, pay less again, because your income will be $125 each, and your tax bill will be lower than it is today. And that's true for farmers too. I think there have been some TV ads about farmers, but they are by and large in the small business category, earning less than $250,000 profit. So some of the stuff out there is a little misleading. There is a tax calculator where you can look at what your own tax bill will be under the fair tax. There's a couple of extra provisions. One expands the property tax credit, and one is a child tax credit of up to $100 per child for families earning $100,000 or less. This is where the calculator is. You can jot that down or put it in the, you can Google it too. It's the fair tax calculator, and it's kind of fun to play with. So, I've laid out the basics of this, what's on the ballot and what it looks like, and there's a lot of ads on TV being. This is one of the biggest, most heavily financed campaigns ever for a ballot initiative. So you're being bombarded at this point. On one side, it's been endorsed by labor groups, League of Women Voters, the AARP, a number of community organizations, and actually there's over 300 different organizations who have signed on to support the fair tax. This picture apparently was taken before COVID, because nobody's wearing masks and they're all scrunched together. Remember those days. On the other side are pretty much very wealthy people, including Ken Griffin, the Illinois Manufacturers Association, the Farm Bureau, and the Chamber of Commerce for Illinois, not the local ones, but the state. So that's kind of how things have aligned. That's where the money is coming from for the ads. Yeah, Governor Pritzker has put money in. Also, he's put a lot of his political capital as well onto passing this measure, so that he can have a balanced budget at the end of the day. One question that comes up is who will actually pay more, and will they all leave? There was a very interesting analysis in Crane's Chicago Business, a local business publication, looking at how many people actually will be paying this extra amount of money to add up to what's estimated to be $3 billion in additional funding. And they found that there's about 20,000 people out of the whole state of 12 million who will be paying the bulk of this additional money. And And so they looked at, well, why aren't these people leaving? Why don't they run away from the additional tax? And they found from the experience of other states that imposed a similar kind of tax that people don't really necessarily leave. They found that some of them have spouses with good jobs. They don't want to leave. They have friends. They've made money here. They have their business contacts and their customer base here, and they like it here as well. And for every few who leave, more come. More, if the business climate is good as it was in New Jersey, they found that millionaires are created by a state that provides adequate services and has adequate revenues. This also happened in Minnesota. They raised the tax much higher than we have, actually, to 9 point something, and they found that their employment went way up. They had huge growth in the number of people earning above $1 million. Even though their taxes went up, they found that they were creating wealth in their state. So that's the experience of other states indicates that people are not going to flee. And if some do, there will be enough others coming in, and then there will be a net revenue gain from this tax. So if Crane says it, I think we can trust that they've looked at all the angles. So what's going on around us? As I mentioned, Minnesota has higher top rates than we do. Wisconsin has rates that are about what we will be getting if this passes. Their top rate is 7.65%. Iowa has actually much higher graduated rates than we do. They tax their middle class much more heavily, much earlier. Missouri has graduated rates, and Ohio has graduated rates. So Illinois is a little behind the game with this. There was a 1932 Supreme Court opinion that kind of threw a wrench in the works, and we ended up putting the flat tax into our 1970 Constitution, kind of as a compromise between the city folks and the downstate. And we've been stuck there ever since. Graduated rates are seen as a more modern way to get revenue and a fairer way by most tax analysts. So I mentioned small businesses and farmers, and it's important to think most will definitely, like 95% will receive a tax cut. And those that do pay more are not the ones who've been hurt by COVID. They're not the ones who have been losing money, because this is an income tax based on your profits. So the only folks who will be paying more are those who have been thriving during this time. And that the money from this fair tax will also allow the state to help them through job training, higher education support, providing a better educated workforce, providing infrastructure, and also having some money in the pockets of their consumers, those who are getting the tax cuts, the 97%. So there's a lot of reasons for small business to vote yes, and we do have a number of supports. I just noticed, this is a picture of Ken Gabler, who went to OPRF. I don't know if any of you know him. Yeah, I just talked to his mother yesterday and found out that he was supporting the fair tax. So there you go. So as I mentioned, it will bring in $3 billion. That's an estimate. Some estimates have ranged as high as $3.6 billion in good times. Nobody really knows. Nobody can really estimate how tax increases will all pan out. But this is the best guess. And there isn't much controversy that is a pretty reasonable ballpark for where we're headed. It will provide money for education, public safety, human services, healthcare, those core services in the discretionary part of the budget that have been cut over time. This will provide some access to be able to restore services and to target them in underserved communities that have been left behind, and the environment. Faith leaders are another big proponent for the fair tax, because there is ultimately a moral value to being able to make our tax system more fair. There was a study by ITEP that showed that the flat tax exacerbates income inequality and the racial wealth gaps as well. Their study found that over the last 20 years, if we had had a graduated rate tax instead of the fair tax that we've had, the flat tax, that low-income Black and Latino communities would be $4 billion wealthier than they are today. And that because we've had a flat tax, that the folks at the upper end of the income tax would have been paying more. And so that transfer of wealth to the most affluent folks has made it possible for the wealthy folks, who are by and large white, to invest that money. They don't need to spend every cent for rent and food the way low and middle income folks do. So they calculated with investments that they would be able to make with that additional money, that they saw an increase of 7.5 billion from the 4 billion that was transferred out of low income communities. So faith leaders have taken that message to heart. A number of our local churches have signed on as endorsers. Unity Temple and Pilgrim Congregational Church have both signed on as organizational endorsers. Another thing that comes up is retirement income, which is a complete red herring, because there's nothing about retirement income in the language of the amendment. There's nothing about retirement income in the Constitution now. There won't be in the future. It's a kind of out of left field issue that's become very hot in the last month or two. And just to be clear, the AARP and a number of other groups support the graduated income tax because they do not tax retirement income. It doesn't make it any easier to add a tax on retirement income. And in fact, the Retired Americans group believes that, and the AARP as well, thinks that if we have a little additional money, that $3 billion will protect retirement exemptions. I mean, right now there's only 3 states in the whole country that provide as much an exemption of retirement income as Illinois does. And so it's sometimes it's been seen as a target, although it's also considered the third rail of Illinois politics, that legislators don't even want to talk about it. That will not change if the fair tax passes. But the AARP wants a little bit of extra insurance, and so they think if we can pass the fair tax, retirement income will be protected. So this is likely to be close. You need either a yes vote of more than, this is according to the Constitution, this is how it has to be done to pass any change in the Constitution. It has to be a yes vote of more than 50% of those voting in the election, or if you take out the folks who skip the question or can't find it on the ballot, then you just look at those people who do find the question and vote on it. You need 60% of those people. So say you have 200 people voting and 100 skip it and 60 vote yes, then it passes because you've got 60% of those voting on the question, even though you've got way less than 50% actually of the voters voting in the election. There was an interesting thing in the paper today that did all the calculations. I'm going to just wait and see what they say at the end, whenever that happens. And since we have mail-in votes that can be counted up until 2 weeks after the election, as long as your ballot is postmarked by November 3rd, it will be counted. So we may not know the answer to this. We may not have a sense of how many voted in the election until we see all of those mail-in ballots. So this is going to be really interesting. Vote early. I think that's the best advice. So November 3rd will be a state holiday. I guess the River Forest Library will be open. I know the Village Hall in Oak Park will be closed, probably in River Forest as well, because it's a state holiday. But they're looking for election judges. If you know a junior or senior in high school, it's a great civics education to become an election judge. So we really, we want to thank you very much for your attention tonight. And now we can take questions. Okay, looks like we have a few.
Thanks, Ian. We got some great questions.
Yeah,
Let's see.
great, okay.
A lot of them are about education. And so I'll put them all together. So do we have any idea how much that $350 million that might close the gap in education?
Yeah, actually there's been some good research done on the 3 years that we've had that evidence-based funding. They've gone and looked at how many districts are coming up to adequacy. And I can't remember the exact number, but I know that they have, especially in the rural downstate districts that were grossly underfunded, they've been able to add computers and lab equipment. They've been able to have buses where they didn't have them when they needed them. So it has made an actual substantial difference. To get to the point where every district has adequate funding, even at the rate of $350 million a year, we're not going to get there by the goal date of 2027. And since we're not likely to be able to do it this year, that puts it even further out of reach.
Wow.
But if we get the fair tax passed, at least there is some real hope. We've seen the commitment by the legislature to push really hard to fund the evidence-based formula. I've seen Kimberly Lightford, who was the head of the education committee, and Don Harmon is also a big supporter of education funding. I think that there is real hope that we will at least climb out of last place. We're getting closer and closer to the goal. So it is a substantial sum of money, especially because it's year over year over year.
Yeah, that's right. Right, exactly. Related to education, and this we can ask it about education, but I think it also relates to the environment and social services and the other areas that you highlighted is where cuts will have to come from if this doesn't pass. So what mechanism is in place to ensure that the increase in funding, that $3 billion, give a little bit, one way or the other, will go towards increasing education? So I think it's
the mechanism is us.
Yeah.
We, the voters, will be in touch with our elected representatives to let them know what our priorities are. So I've heard people say that the real work begins on November 4th or November 20th, yeah, whenever we know what the outcome is. We can look at what their past priorities were. We can look at Governor Pritzker's budget address from February, which lays out very clearly where he would put the additional money, and we can look at the budget that was actually passed in May by the legislature to see what was spared, what they would like to spend additional funding on, and education ranks very high in both lists. So it will, some of it in Governor Pritzker's budget address, he lays out very clearly that we do have an obligation to meet our current pension obligation. Part of the reason we're in this huge mess is because past legislatures have skipped out on all or some of the pension obligation, and then it piled up from year to year with interest, and now we owe an astonishing amount to the pension funds, not because the pensioners are getting it, but because the state didn't make its share of their owed obligation. So to prevent that from getting worse, the governor has pledged to make the current payment into the pensions The really tough part is that there was a ramp put in 1995 by Governor Edgar they were way behind on pensions. They said, well, let's put in place a payment plan and we'll stick to it, but we're not going to pay the full amount today. We'll pay a little bit and we'll ramp it up as time goes on. And now we're kind of getting into the steep part of the ramp, and it's crowding out other budget priorities. So we need to fix that. That's a high priority to figure out how we're going to deal with that huge debt. But in the meantime, we need to at least pay our current obligation, and that is an important priority as well as education.
I have a question kind of related to that, which is, so, and you partially addressed it, is how do we ensure that the revenue from the fair tax won't go towards pension payments, which are the big drain on, it's the debt service costs. It's the debt service cost, which is killing us.
Right. Well, we will make our current payments. We will make our current payments for past borrowing that we've done. The state issued a lot of revenue bonds that need to be paid back. And the state has committed to making those payments. As far as paying the pensions, there have been court rulings that say, well, first of all, let me just say in 2011, the state did change the way pensions are calculated. Employees since 2011 have been in a different tier with much lower benefit. I was hired by the state around that time and didn't get any, I would have had to work for a very long time in order to even vest. And the pension amount is lower. But for employees hired before that, the court has said, hey, you've got an obligation, you've got a contract with these employees that cannot be diminished. And so there needs to be a plan, there needs to be a strategy to deal with all of that. So how do we know that all of the revenue from the fair tax will go? This is something that maybe, it won't all go to that. There have been pledges, and the legislature could have been doing this all along and chose to spend the money on these other priorities as well. It's likely that going forward, they will continue to honor those priorities, but they will have a little more flexibility and be able to do both, meet the priorities and start dealing with the pension crisis. And there need to be a lot of additional reforms and changes made. They're being worked out, but in the meantime, if we don't have the fair tax proceeds, we don't have money for the education and the other social services, those other priorities that we also have. So we need both and.
I know we're going to get close on time here, and so because there's some good questions. So I wonder, could we just talk, excuse me, in general about, and I think it was Nancy maybe who brought this up at the beginning. How do we trust politicians to use this money wisely? And then the second question is for the folks who are opposing the fair tax, have they presented a plan on spending cuts that will continue to give us our services and pay our pension and so forth?
Okay, well, as far as the alternative plan, I have not seen a plan that says by line item you can cut here and here and here. As I mentioned, things have been cut and cut. We have one of the lowest headcounts in our state for services. We pay one of the lowest reimbursement rates to providers like foster care providers or other providers of services in the country. So a lot of cutting has already happened. I have seen a plan by, say, the Civic Committee of the Commercial Club that proposes raising the flat income tax rate in order to get additional revenue in. And they've also proposed taxing retirement income. They've made more suggestions for ways to get additional revenues than saying cuts are possible. Um, yeah, I know it's not pretty news. It's tough, but here we are. As far as, let's see, what was the first part of
It
that
was
question?
about, trusting the politicians
Oh,
to use
trust.
this money,
Yeah, yeah,
use it responsibly, because we've all seen what's gone on in Springfield, and we're in this debt
yeah,
as the result of many, 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 many years and many administrations not
yeah.
getting done.
Trust is a huge issue. I know. The way I think about it, though, is that we do trust the schools to be open when we bring our kids there. We do trust bridges to hold when we drive across them. There's lots of state services that we trust to be there when we need them. And if we don't provide revenue to the state to be able to keep the schools open and to keep the bridges safe, um, the money is going for those purposes. They may not be using every single nickel all the time, but but the budget's $42 billion. And the vast majority of it is absolutely used for what it says it will be used in the budget. It's there for all to read, and that's where the money is going. To the extent that you think that they're not spending it wisely, you need to let them know. And if they're not responsive, you need to get a different elected representative.
Mm.
It's a democracy. That's kind of our only option, I think.
Another question that's come up is how much is the pension debt, the debt service cost and the pension related to the bond markets and the interest rates that Illinois has to pay for that cost, for carrying that cost?
Yeah, it's all wrapped up together, and they have the state under Blagojevich actually issued a pension obligation bonds, which turned out to be a pretty good deal at the time. The statutory rate to repay the pension trust, I think, was somewhere between 8 and 12%. And then they were able to issue bonds at a much, much lower rate, and so they came out ahead on that. But it's still interest owed, even though it's a lower rate. So you can't keep doing that forever. Ralph Martiri has proposed a way to re-amortize the debt. Governor Pritzker has worked on a different kind of a plan. Much smarter people than I am are working on it, and it's got to be done. Meanwhile, the state is aware of its obligations. They're not going to just close doors tomorrow and pay only the pensions. They know they've got a car to keep running, and they need to keep the ship afloat and services provided, because that's
Right.
That's their obligation, is to you, the citizens and residents of this state. That's why they're there. Yeah, let's see. I see a question about the current flat tax rate is 4.95%. And yeah, and how it's going to actually be split. Some people have suggested we should have a lockbox and have it put into one spot and say, this has to be spent for this purpose. But then you see things like COVID come along, and you realize that there needs to be some flexibility in the way that budgets are done. If we had it all set over here for education, we couldn't be able to provide grants to small businesses to keep them going, or provide PPE for our first responders. So, every once in a while it hits you that, gee, we do need to have some flexibility in the way legislators are able to, and administrators of agencies are able to apportion their funds within limits. And there's statutory limits on how much things can be transferred between funds. So it's not.
It does rely a lot on us to call our legislators on when they're not doing what we think that they should do and what they said they would do. Why don't we do one final question and just quick try to open it up for a little bit of discussion. Great questions. If the average taxpayer earns about $61,000 and the flat tax is currently 4.75, aren't they going to pay more under the graduated tax?
No, because the flat tax is currently 4.95. So they will be paying less under the graduated tax. They're currently paying 4.95 on the whole amount. And under the graduated tax, they'll pay less on the first 10,000. They'll pay 4.9 on the, a little bit less, not a lot, a little bit less.
Right.
And then a little bit, but still under 4.95 for on the rest. So they will be paying less under the graduated tax. And then there's the extra tax credits as well. So that is, and you can go to that tax calculator, type in your situation, whether you have kids, whether you're above, I think it's 65, and then you can see what your tax rate will actually be if it passes.
Shannon, if you want to take us off of mute right now, we can open it up. I know there's not a lot of time left, but
Yes.
those were great questions. And so let's just open it a little bit for some final thoughts, comments, or questions. Everybody's coming off of mute here.
Yeah, I see a question about the standard deduction changing. Illinois is pretty much closely tied to the federal tax structure, and in addition, we have exemptions on state taxes of $22.75 per person in your household, and that will not change. That will stay the same.
Are there any other questions or comments from folks?
Okay. How many of you have already voted?
I have.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, I didn't vote purposely because I wanted to hear this.
Oh, good.
I mean, I don't really understand it all, but it's like, I guess I'm the one that don't know how you can make sure that this money goes somewhere. So,
Yeah. Ultimately, it is a little bit of an act of faith every time we pay taxes to the federal government or the state government or to your local school board or anybody. You send in your check, and then you watch the board meetings, you watch what the legislature does, and you make sure that they do what they said they would do.
or get them out.
All right, get them out. You know?
Right.
Not easy.
It's not easy, no.
No.
But we do want good roads, and we do want good schools, and we do want mental health services to be available when our loved ones need them. So
Right.
we do get something for our money.
I mean, one of the things when I first started working with Ann in the spring, Ann is a fiscal policy expert. I'm not, I'm just a volunteer with the league. And one of the things that struck me the most when I was learning about this was why my property taxes were so high. And it's because the state's not paying their share of education for my little 2-bedroom bungalow in River Forest. I'm like, okay, all right, this is starting to come together.
Yeah, and we rely really heavily on the sales tax. We just
Yes.
raised the gasoline taxes.
Very
the
regressive taxes.
All of those taxes are really high because our income taxes are flat, and the highest income people have not been paying their fair share. If they had been paying those high rates that like they would be paying in California, New York, New Jersey, Wisconsin, all of these places, if they lived there, they'd be paying a whole lot more. And instead of them paying, you have been paying all along because those other taxes have been high.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a chance to kind of shift that back to a way that makes more sense for everybody.
Okay, wait, I guess, so this is federal tax we're talking about, not
No.
property tax? I mean,
This
now I'm
is-
confused.
It's state income tax.
State income tax.
Yeah, and schools
The
are
state.
funded. Yeah, schools are funded by state income taxes and property taxes. Those two
So
things,
that's why our property taxes are so high,
right?
because we have no factories here in town and all that stuff.
Yeah, well,
You gotta
that's
pay the
why
teachers.
You gotta pay the teachers. You do. Yeah. I was on the school board in Oak Park for 8 years,
Right.
So I felt
I
this.
go to those meetings too.
That's good.
I mean, people don't understand the power that the school board has. They don't really understand that they control how much money we have to give them. I mean, all this. They don't understand it.
And I can tell you, even
I'll
just seeing
go.
one person sitting in the audience made me sit up a little straighter.
Hmm. Interesting.
It's worth going to those meetings.
Uh-huh.
All right, we're right at 8. So are there any final questions? Or is there anything we can get back to you on or share, or email?
Yeah, if you think of anything, feel free to email me or Jane or to the league, and we'd be happy to answer your questions. If you have another group you'd like to have hear the presentation, we'll do it again. And I
We're
think
running till the end of the month.
it's up to the 3rd, right? So
How will I find this to show to my husband when you, or you just can't go on and play this again, can you?
Yeah, we're gonna put it on the River Forest Public Library's YouTube page.
Oh,
So, and I'm sure we will link to that from our website as well.
And then I-
So,
could see this again.
yeah, you can.
When you do that, send us the link too, and we'll share it with our league members.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Excellent.
good. Okay, and tell your friends what you think and what you're thinking. Share it, talk it up,
Yeah.
and make sure everybody finds it at the top of the ballot.
Oh, my God.
All right.
Yeah, but you know what?
Shannon?
This is actually the best hope we have of getting out from under our problems and building the kind of state we'd like to see. There's a lot of hope in this.
That's a nice way to put it. Shannon, thank you so much for hosting the league.
Thank you for
We were
for
delighted
joining
to
us.
do it.
Yeah, thank you. It was a wonderful presentation. I learned a lot, and thanks for partnering with us with this. This was great.
Great,
I
thank
did
you.
too.
All right, everyone.
All right. Thank you all.
Come to the
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.